Hey there, and welcome to the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. It is great to have you join us. This podcast series features those who have gained victory over a life encounter. With that life experience, we encourage those who are experiencing something that might seem to be insurmountable. We advance and encourage others by passing forward evaluated life experiences. We have three objectives in this podcast series. We want to encourage those who are engaged in any type of life encounter by offering to walk with you to help you gain victory over anything that might seem impossible. We want to share our experience to help you. Our second objective is to help you develop a confident resolve that there are multiple options to get past any life obstacle. It's a matter of thinking into the situation. Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you are facing a dilemma resulting from a previous decision you wish you could reverse, we want to help you think into all of the facts and factors involved in making an informed decision. I'm Ron Cooper, founder of the Cooper Culture. I'm with my wife and business manager, Marty. Together, we are the Cooper Culture Company who is sponsoring this podcast series. Today, we feature Dr. Frank L. Douglas, who is internationally acclaimed. He was born in British Guyana and has established himself internationally in the pharmaceutical world in addition to being an author of 2 books. He wrote the book Defining Moments of a Free Man from a Black Stream and also wrote the book addressing systemic discrimination by reframing the problem. He is a very interesting individual who has great insight into discrimination, and we will have the opportunity to feature him on another podcast. But today we are talking to him about his background and some of his life travails, but we're going to continue featuring him in discussing how to reframe the problem. But Marty, what are some takeaways our listeners can gain from Dr. Douglas?
What an interesting gentleman he is. A life story of determination after he attempted suicide. Starting at a young age, Dr. Douglas worked to better his life, changing his mindset and how he felt about himself. He learned he was created for bigger accomplishments. He excelled academically. He became a leader, making sure everyone within his influence was treated fairly and making a positive impact on those around him. He is a people person wanting to help people find value within themselves.
Very interesting person. Let's listen and learn together. Dr. Frank Douglas, thank you so much for joining us. Our listeners are going to be very interested in learning about a little bit of your past. From what I have learned from your writing, you were having suicidal tendencies when you were about 12 years old, but you overcame that. And some of our listeners, but at least too many people from our perspective, have some mental health challenges, and meaning we just don't have the right positive thinking thoughts. And our listeners are going to be very interested in knowing what your past was and perhaps what you are doing currently in the context of mental health. Dr. Frank, good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm now 80 years of age, so 12 years is a long time ago, but it is a memory that has stayed with me. I grew up in what was British Guyana, now Guyana, of very humble circumstances. We lived in an extended family. My mother and her 4 kids lived in one room. And it was my task every Saturday to go to the market, which was about a 2-mile walk, to buy the groceries. When I was 12, my grandfather actually bought a secondhand bike for me. That Saturday morning, I was just so excited because rather than having to walk 2 miles and then walk back with a loaded basket, I would be able to ride. So I went to the market, bought things, came back. I remember distinctly riding back with joy in my heart in a real sense. I turned into the yard, as we called it, into the compound where we lived. And as I turned, I suddenly recognized that it was sandy. And before I could do anything, I had a spill. Everything, of course, fell off the handle of the bike. And it was a mess because I had bought oil and vinegar, etc. The only thing I could save was the 3 or 4 fishes that we had bought and some of the ground provisions, plantains. I gathered what I could, the rice, the flour, all of that was gone. No sooner I got into the little room where we were, my mother began to flog me, to beat me with a belt furiously, with a fury I'd never seen in her before. I kept asking her why. And she said, your aunt said that she saw you purposely push the basket off the bike because you did not want to go to the market. Now, this was a common thing that happened. This aunt of mine, and I have I never understood it. Interesting end to her life, actually. But I never understood it. But she would constantly tell tales on me. And my mother, who had a small job, gone in the day, when she returned home in the afternoon, I would get another flogging because of another untruth that my aunt had told. So at the end of the flogging, I decided that my life was not worth it. And so I left and started walking towards the seawall. We have a wall in the capital, and we lived probably about 2 miles from the seawall. And I walked onto the seawall and to the end of the jetty and was going to jump in and drown myself. As I stood there looking at the big boulders and the barnacles on the boulders, I began trying to figure out, how do I do this? Do I step onto the boulders, walk into the water? And then I had this thought, what if I slipped on the boulders and got caught in the boulders and in fact never made it to the water, but the water came over me and I had a slow drowning. And the thought of that, in a real sense, scared me. So as I stood there thinking of it, I frankly became very scared of the thought of dying and decided not to do it, but to go and visit a woman whom I used to have to visit every Sunday, who it turned out was actually my grandmother. I discovered that at the end of this day. I decided to go visit her to tell her what had happened. When I left her, returned home, my mother then revealed to me, a woman, Mrs. Graveshandy, was actually my mother and who my father actually was. I was very frightened in a sense because I had very dark thoughts about what I would do to my aunt. Fortunately, I had been going for about 2 or 3 years to an evangelical church. And so I left the house again and went to see Brother Mac, as we called him, the minister. I told him I wanted to give my heart to the Lord. Told him what had happened. Told him some of the very dark thoughts I had about killing my aunt. That was what actually turned me around, as a matter of fact. Life changed for me. I became a very dedicated student, a very dedicated person in church. I became a boy preacher, actually. Ended up taking a couple of exams in which I achieved the first position in the country. And that led to my getting a Fulbright scholarship to come to America to go to college.
Dr. Frank, thank you for that very inspiring message. What I'm reading into what you said is your mother was influenced by your aunt, and that became a negative experience to where you thought at one point, I just have no value in living. But your grandmother was the person who came to your aid and said, nope, Dr. Frank, you have value. And Ghana, from what I understand, is a very spiritual nation. And through your grandmother's influence, you came to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And through that process, you found purpose in your life. Did I just describe anything that is not accurate?
Well, unfortunately, what happened with my grandmother is that after she revealed that her son was my father, she disappointed me because what I had hoped, since I visited her every Sunday and was puzzled why my mother always insisted, I had hoped after telling her the tale that she would let me stay with her, this kind woman, I thought. Then she revealed this and said to me, your mother, I was the eldest, Stella, that's my mother's name, Stella depends on you. You have to go back home. So I now was really without any hope or help. And on the way walking back home, thinking about, the thoughts I was thinking in very graphic ways of what I would do to my aunt. I was really planning that I would actually do her real body harm. It suddenly occurred to me that I was in a dark place. So I went home, said a couple of things to my mother, who revealed to me why, asked me where I was. I told her I'd gone to Mrs. Graves Handy. She revealed that she was actually my grandmother. And I left and went to the minister, talked with him and told him I wanted to give my heart to the Lord because I'd become very scared about the very dark thoughts I had about my aunt.
Was it your grandmother who ultimately helped you think through what you're describing as a kind of a dark early age in your life? You seemed, as I'm listening to you describe events of nearly 65 or 68 years ago, you seem to be describing a person who had actually some good thoughts. You're able to do some good thinking, you're sort through, but you were just not surrounded by the best people, it seems.
Unfortunately not. It's unfortunate because my grandmother turned out not to be any help at all. Church became Sunday school. The church became my life, basically.
Very interesting you would say that. Your grandmother was a great influence at one point and then became a little lesser of a positive influence. But ultimately, it was the fellowship. It was God himself, but it was the fellowship of the church that helped you find your real purpose in life. Would that be an accurate statement?
That is more than accurate. It was everything.
Did you find right away the fellowship in the church you wanted, or did some people have doubts in you? I'm just curious. How long did it take for you to understand, or actually maybe the term is believe, yes, the fellowship I need is right here in this church?
Well, I was at a point that my grandmother was no help. I had nowhere else to go. I had these very dark thoughts. I had been going to this evangelical church since I was about 9, about 3 years. I was very familiar with the gospel, the teaching of the gospel. I went to Sunday school, went to Sunday night church, went to Wednesday night prayer meeting. My mother always took me to the prayer meeting, even though I would be falling asleep. In fact, a few times she would tell me to stand up so I wouldn't be sleeping. So I was very much familiar with the message of the gospel, and had already started. I think Brother Mac, the minister, I think he recognized in May at that age leadership qualities. Of course, I had absolutely no idea, because he immediately after we sat and we prayed and I gave my heart to the Lord, the next Sunday he actually had me teach one of the sessions of Bible school to the smaller kids, to the young kids. And so I began that way. And then on Saturday nights when we used to go to preach, he would preach at the what we call the shop side at the corner of the street. There was a particular corner, there was a shop there. One night he asked me to preach. That started me off as a boy preacher. I was probably about 13, 14 then. No, yeah, about 13 was about a year after that. He just called on me to preach. I became a boy preacher. And as a matter of fact, at the age of 19, after I'd finished high school, for a year, I was actually the director of Youth for Christ in Guyana before coming to America to go to college.
Are you living in Guyana right now?
No, I'm actually, right now I'm in Florida. I've been living in America, actually, never returned home because that's another story. I was actually exiled by the Prime Minister 75. So I remained in America, because America has been home since 1963 when I first came here.
Well, welcome. We are glad to have you. Are you still preaching the gospel, or have you entered retirement?
Well, I'm retired. I must say, life was very difficult for me. When I came to America, I arrived in America actually about 8 days before Martin Luther King's March in Washington, and became very puzzled because I immediately began to experience being discriminated against because of the color of my skin, and then had the sad experience that a church that I wanted to attend, I could not attend because of the color of my skin. I went to Lehigh University, was very much involved in the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship Club there. But about 2 years into it, I became so disillusioned and tortured that I actually decided to step away from organized religion and just to live a life dealing directly with God and the Savior myself, because I could not deal with organized religion anymore as I saw it.
I want to ask you, why did the prime minister exile?
Yeah,
Okay.
excellent. Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I have both a PhD and an MD, and he had been tracking my progress in America. And twice, actually, when I'd completed my master's, he had offered me a job to come back to Guyana as in charge of education. I had declined. And the reason I declined his offers had everything to do with I did not support what he was doing. I liked his policies, but so many of these leaders, he was authoritarian and basically filling his own pockets. And, the poor people were getting poorer. I had visited home about 3 occasions, and each time he summoned me. He had his people at the airport that I discovered that there were a list of names, and when you arrived, they immediately informed him. Well, the last time that I was there, I visited a classmate of mine who was opposing him. His name is Walter Rodney. I was there about probably half an hour when a messenger came from the prime minister and said the prime minister wanted to see me immediately. So I went. We had a brief conversation. The conversation was, "Comrade, I have a job for you." And I said, "What is it, comrade?" And I'd just completed my PhD at that point and had started medical school. He said, "I want you to go into this place in the interior and run a leather factory." And I said, "As you know, comrade leader," as we called him, I sent a proposal from Cornell University to train nurses to be nurse practitioners. Cornell will pay for everything. I would very much like to be a part of that instead of going into the... And he looked at me and he said, "Comrade, you always have this uncanny habit of trying to tell me how to run my country. I want you to leave this country right now and never return before I die." And I started to say something. I heard a song behind me. I turned back. There was the GDF, the Guyanese Defense Guard with a drawn gun. And I said, "Well, comrade leader, I cannot leave the country without an exit permit. And in fact, I've only gotten here a few hours, just barely said hello to my mother." And he said, "Everything is arranged. You will fly to Trinidad. Following day, you fly back to America and never return until I die." And that was it.
Dr. Frank, you impress me as a person who has a very confident resolve. You are a person who will overcome. You seem to be very determined. You have a PhD and a medical degree, a very learned person. I do want to discuss a little bit further about the books you have written, but I'm very interested in your thoughts about the United States, what appears to Marty and me to be a racial divide we have now, and maybe it's growing in the church as well. I'm not certain. That's a very wide open question and topic for you, but our listeners are very interested in your perspective.
I was on a podcast very recently. It was a very interesting podcast with the fellow's name is Ayalon, who is the CEO of what is called Greek University. It's a university for sororities and fraternities, basically. And he had heard me speak about a book I had just published. And he came to me and said, I really would like you to come on my podcast. And so I did. And at the very end of the podcast, he asked the question, not dissimilar to yours. He said, my two sons, they are looking at colleges. And of course, Harvard was on the list. And when we were there at Harvard, we had this discussion. And that is that right now, before the Supreme Court, there is the issue of affirmative action. And if the Supreme Court votes against it, young Black kids will not be able to go to a place like Harvard. What do you think the Supreme Court should do? And I said to him, I said, I just wish that the Supreme Court would make decisions based on principles and not on politics. And here is the principle. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and their creator has endowed them with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if we have a situation in which historically some people were denied those rights during slavery or, whatever other condition, then as good people, it's upon us to try to remedy that. And so that's, for me, the basic principle, so that everyone has the opportunity, the unalienable right that was given to them by the Creator for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that has been the thing that has driven me to deal with many of the challenges that I have personally had with respect to discrimination. And I don't talk about racism, I talk about discrimination. Because, whether it is ethnicity or gender or religion, be you Muslim, it is this view that my particular view is the right view and no other view should be allowed to exist. And once one has that type of approach, you begin to have certain biases, whether conscious or unconscious, and you begin to act on those biases, and you begin to discriminate negatively. So the book that I wrote actually is interesting, if I may share that with your listeners.
Please do.
Yes, yeah. We do want to promote you and your books.
Okay. When I was writing my memoirs about 5 years ago, and I was writing one episode in my memoir, it occurred to me that I had been, in a real sense, living my life in a particular manner when dealing with issues of discrimination. And I'll tell you what the incident was. When I had completed my PhD, I got a job to work at Xerox. And for several months, weeks, it was about 3 months, several weeks, let's say, I could not get a good project. And one day, a white young man joined the group, and within a week, he was placed on the hottest project we had at Xerox. I went to my manager to ask again, when would I get a good project? I got the usual answers I got before. And I suddenly said to him, Steve, why don't you think about me as though I were Bob and not Frank? And I was stunned to see the recognition come over his face. I mean, it was an honest recognition I could see. And he said to me, you're right. Bob has just gotten here and I've put him on the artery project. Well, I was furious. I ran out of his office, ran to the office of the senior vice president to give him yet another example of my being discriminated against. And that was the incident that led me to go to medical school, as a matter of fact. So it turned out to be a positive thing. However, a couple of years thereafter, I was thinking of that episode and realized I had really made a mistake for two reasons. The first reason is that Dr. Tribus, the senior vice president, that summer had hired 3 young Black PhDs to join the 1 Black PhD that Xerox had at that time. Therefore, it was probably more important to him that a Frank Douglas would be successful at Xerox than it probably was to Frank Douglas, because he'd put himself on the line. The second thing I totally missed is that my desired outcome was to get a good project. It was not for the senior vice president to go and have difficult words with my manager. So had I reframed the situation and had I gone and said to Dr. Tribus, Dr. Tribus, could you help my manager find me a good project? I might have retired at Xerox, because that was within his power of influence as the senior vice president, 2 levels above my own manager. And that was my desired outcome. As I wrote my memoirs, and I wrote that incident and I thought about memoirs, I then realized the way I had dealt with conflict and discrimination is that I had been reframing the problem. So I've written this book called Addressing Systemic Discrimination by Reframing the Problem, in which, and I interviewed about 18 individuals, heard their cases, have a particular way in which to record their cases, but then to take them through a process of what I call reframing the problem that they say with which they're faced, and let us look for a better problem to solve. And one of the characteristics of a better problem to solve, it would be a problem whose solution would not only benefit you, but would benefit others in the unit and would increase productivity of everyone. If we can find that problem, you will be able to have a meaningful dialogue with your manager. Then if you go to your manager and say, I'm being discriminated against, what do we do? So I have spent my life, not until I was writing my memoir that I realized that, basically doing that, to deal with problems that I had myself and helping individuals who came to me. I ended up in a position where I could help people because I ended up being the first Black person to be on the board of management of a top 5 global pharmaceutical company and responsible for research, development, and regulatory affairs. And in fact, the scientific teams I led have contributed to putting more than 25 drugs on the market for diabetes, hypertension, etc. So I was in a position in which, individuals would come to me to explain about conflicts with their bosses, etc. This is what I would try to help them to do, is to find a better problem to solve.
Racism, institutional bias, white supremacy, many topics are being discussed right now. Dr. Douglas has a very unique approach to this, having experienced various forms of discrimination, and his perception is, his innovative idea is to reframe the problem. Can we think through any institutional biases we may have? Can we think into the larger picture of how others would benefit from a solution of reframing the problem such that a greater good comes out of whatever I may be feeling at this point, my feeling of being targeted, discriminated against, or whatever the situation. But can I develop a new attitude? Can I think through, and help others achieve the greater good by reframing the problem? You are an outstanding critical thinker. Reframing whatever situation we're in, I would like to pursue that further in additional episodes. But Dr. Frank, there are a lot of people who need to know how to reframe. I picture you as having the mindset, even though you've been discriminated against, you're not a victim. You will be a victor over, because you choose to reframe the situation you're in. You will find the greater good in the situation you're in. And through your critical thinking, through your problem-solving skills, you can actually help change the mindset of those with whom you're working. That's how I'm processing what you're saying. Again, I'm going to ask you, did I describe a Dr. Frank that is not realistic of who you are?
No, I think that is the essence of who I am. And one of the things in the story I told you about Xerox, when I reflected on it, it was to see the real awareness that came over my manager's face. When I reflected, it was clear to me as I saw that reaction and reflected on it, that he was not consciously doing, the ill that was coming to me. Because once I put it in a context in which he could see it, and he saw it, he had the realization, yes, Bob has only been here a week and I've put him on the top project.
Dr. Frank, I think that is the essence of the follow-on episodes. It's not good for me to ask you while we're recording if you would commit, but yet I will ask. I'm just going to be so bold as to ask
you have my commitment.
Thank you.
I would be delighted.
We need to discuss further how we can help establish a mindset of reframing, problem solving, critical thinking, and in spite of what you have been through, you have the mindset and the courage, the stamina, the persistence of doing what you know to be right, and you're willing to work with those to help change the mindset of. Undoubtedly, you probably encountered some people, well, you're not going to change, so we just move on to another. Dr. Frank, our listeners are absolutely intrigued with your ability to help change the mindset by reframing. We truly look forward to additional episodes with you. Thank you for sharing this portion of your life, and we look forward to continuing this life journey and dialogue with you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
The mindset to rise above whatever situation we're in, to critically think into, to have the problem-solving skills, to reason as solution, to where there's a win-win, that is, a solution that benefits everyone. Too often, we get involved in situations, we become emotional, and it becomes a situation where some people involved in situations of discrimination, being done wrong, want to win and the other person lose, devise a win-lose type scenario where I win, you lose, I walk away happy. But Dr. Douglas proposes a solution, the mindset of thinking into the situation we're in to reframe the problem. What a great concept. Reframe the problem to think into the greater good of being above the situation, not to get emotionally wrapped up in, distraught with, not wanting to seek revenge, but rather reframe the problem such that there's a greater good in all of this. Can we help others develop a mindset of thinking into and devising a solution where others are winning, there are others who benefit, the greater good, that everyone can benefit from the solution? It takes a special mindset, but Dr. Douglas has written a book and he is developing the concept that we can, in fact, reframe the problem such that the greater good can occur from all of this. I'm looking forward to additional episodes with Dr. Douglas to learn more about how we can develop that mindset to reframe the problem, how we can help transfer that mindset to others, how we can be a catalyst to transform others, to help develop that mindset where we can rise above whatever situation we're in and develop a situation to reframe the situation we're in to something greater to benefit everyone involved. Everyone can benefit from coaching. Coaching is an attitude, a mindset of helping to reframe the problem, to get beyond, to grow above whatever situation we're in. Marty and I are certified life coaches through John Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. We can help you help develop the mindset of reframing whatever problem you are encountering. It is a matter of dealing with and rising above. Let's schedule a complimentary 30-minute coaching session. Contact us at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, M-A-R-T-Y, at thecooperculture.com. Let's work together to help each of us develop that mindset of rising above to have the solution to reach the greater good. We hope we can warrant a 5-star rating with this podcast series. We hope you will want to share this podcast with your Facebook friends, your LinkedIn connections, your Twitter and Instagram communities. The greater the opportunity we have and benefit from sharing with others, the greater the opportunity we'll have to benefit others. We are keynote speakers. If we can have the opportunity to address your group to help them overcome whatever situations they're in to achieve the greater good through relationships and being able to reframe the problem, let's work together and do just that. You can contact me at espeakers.com and search for Ron Cooper F4 Pilot. Again, the more we work together, the greater the opportunity we will have to benefit others. In working together, we will help others achieve the greater good. We look forward to working with you.